Hello and welcome to the Lockton Marine podcast. My name is Anders Langeland Johannesson. This is the first episode in a series recorded in conversation with Claes-Göran Wetterholm on the Titanic. We cover stories about the people on board, the myths, the truths, and what relevance this disaster has more than 130 years later. I hope you enjoy it. Hello. Today,
sorry.
No, that's fine.
No. Oh, yes.
So, as you can hear,
No.
I'm here with a very special guest. I'm in Stockholm to speak to Claes-Göran Wetterholm, ethnologist, maritime historian, researcher, and one of the world's premier experts on the Titanic. Do you want to argue with me about it?
No. Okay.
So, I said it so you don't have to. You may ask why we are going to talk about something that happened over 110 years ago and how that can be relevant to listeners today. Well, I think, for one, it's a topic that I've always wanted to talk about because in many ways it inspired me to go into the maritime industry. I remember picking up Robert Ballard's book when I was 8 years old from the school library and never returning it. But I also think it has... in recent years, in our lifetimes, the Titanic has become a pop cultural phenomenon. And I think in many ways, we forget what it meant to humanity, what it meant to shipping, and what it meant to insurance, the industry that we're in. And I'm going to try and have a conversation with you, Claes-Göran, about all of these things, but I'm not going to dictate the direction we go in because I'm sure all of it's going to be interesting to anyone listening.
It's impossible to.
So, the first question I want to ask you, so why the Titanic? I look around the room we're in, and it's clear that collecting all of this stuff is a lifetime's achievement.
Yes, unfortunately. It is.
So where does it begin?
It begins in 1960 in the middle of nowhere, northwest of Stockholm, in a tiny village. And that was actually a television program that sparked the whole thing, but it was definitely not about Titanic. It was about the era, the Edwardian, Victorian era. So they mentioned Titanic there. And I asked my father, what is Titanic? So he read to me from the encyclopedia. And I guess something started then and there. And then he said, years later, he regretted to have read that to me.
So this would have been, a few years after A Night to Remember came out.
Yeah, I tried to find the book. It was impossible where I lived. The small library didn't have anything, so finally my mother took me to the larger library 40 kilometers away. And then I tried to find anything that was on the Titanic. I know I even sat in the local paper's archive and wrote down by hand articles, wrote them down by hand. So that's how I started when I was about 12 something. But then I started, I got the idea to write to Walter Lord, author of this. So I first of all thought he was working for New York Times. He didn't, but I found him finally. And then he recommended me to find two books. I had by then already started buying illustrations, photos from the shipyard in the 1960s. So he recommended two books. One was the story called the Maiden Voyage by Geoffrey Marcus, and the other one was Peter Padfield's Titanic and Californian. So that's how I started. I didn't understand them at all, so I was sitting there with a word book and writing over the words when I didn't understand it. So that's how I learned English.
But it's an interesting reflection on the fact that in 1960. The disaster, the ship, the name wasn't as ubiquitous as it is today.
But whenever I went to a second-hand bookshop, antiquariat, it was impossible. they said, no, we don't have it. Everybody's asking for the Titanic.
Right.
Yeah. So when the film had been shown in Sweden and was gone, there was still a very large interest.
This is a night to remember.
A night to remember. And I usually say that the what would you say, the locks, the dam gates had barely became to open. They opened more and more because before the big flooding came. So it really sparked off when in 1985, when the wreck was found, and then finally when the film came. But I mean, so far there are at least 9 movies about the Titanic.
Those are German ones.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The film itself, because Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, he wanted to have an anti-British film about the Titanic, because he had read a book called Der Untergang der Titanic, from Fellingham. And he had picked a director which was he disliked very much.
Right.
Almost hated. And same for Selpin, the director. He hated Goebbels.
Leni Riefenstahl was not available.
But Goebbels knew that Selpin was the only one who would be able to do a film like this. So the exterior filming took place in 1943 on board the Cap Arcona up in the Danzig Bay, Gdansk. And the film was partly sabotaged by the German Navy who was there. And he got very, very frustrated. He drank too much. And in a bar once, he talked about the Scheißarmee, or the Scheißflotte, the shit army and the shit navy. And the so-called friend reported this to Gestapo. He was arrested. He never took anything back, and then Gestapo said that he had committed suicide in his cell.
Oh, yeah.
They said.
Convenient.
So they continued with the film with the director called Klingler, and then the film was ready. It was got the mark that it was good for the nation. Goebbels saw it and he just exploded because he became so angry. Because he realized they couldn't show it, so it was forbidden before it was released. Because he had, for example, shown the wireless operator, Jack Phillips, who, when the ship is sinking, takes out a little canary from his cage, opens a window and lets it out, while the orchestra is playing Near My God to Thee. It's very emotional. And suddenly the operator became a hero. Impossible in Germany. And also, when they pointed only one man here, in this case Bruce Ismay, as the person who was responsible for the whole disaster. And in 1944, it was not difficult for Germans to realize that there was one man who was responsible for the much larger disaster that happened to Germany. And that was impossible to show it. So it was shown first in Paris and in Stockholm. And it was immediately forbidden in the Allied zone. It was too anti-British. It made an enormous success in the East, in the communist countries, because it was very anti-capitalistic and very anti-British.
But the use of the Titanic as a piece of propaganda goes back almost to the inquiry, right? Because a lot of things that only came out later. So you mentioned, thank you. We mentioned Robert Ballard in 85, when it was finally confirmed that the vessel had broken in two. Am I right?
But there is a very funny detail here. A good friend of mine who's now deceased, Alan Ruffman in Halifax, he was a marine geologist. And once when I met him and went to see him, he showed me the plans of the North Atlantic, I mean the bottom. And he asked me, did you know that NATO, the British, they had surveyed and mapped the whole North Atlantic? No, I didn't know that. So, because they want to know where to put these nuclear submarines in case of war. They have to find good places for them. But, he said, And this was done long before Titanic was found. But he said, did you know that where the Titanic is, there is just a blank spot? Then we have to start to wonder, did they know where the Titanic was? Did they? Because Bella worked for the U.S. Navy.
He wasn't looking for the Titanic. He was looking for.
But this was said back in a documentary I have from 1986. So this is not news. This was already said back then that we were sent out to find these submarines that had been lost. Thresher was one, and then I had some time left. So he did it with the French Ifremer. And Jean-Louis, what's his name? I can look it up. I forgot his family name. The French scientist. He had mapped the search areas where they were looking, moving the lawn, as they call it. So it's actually thanks to him that the Titanic was found, not Robert Ballard. But today he is the man who found the Titanic.
Yeah.
But you see, because they were on a U.S. Navy ship, the Nor, Ballard had helicopters to pick up the videos and send them back. And therefore, he got all the attention. Jean-Louis is not the person who stands out in the lights to be photographed or filmed or whatever. He's a very sort of silent person, rather. So Ballard got all the attention. He had the press conferences. And one more thing is that when the helicopters came to pick up the videos, they were on a U.S. Navy ship with this public domain. Remember that? That's just public domain. The French part was paid by a French photographic company. They had subsidized the French part under the condition that they would have the images first. But because they were on the Navy ship, Ballard sent the pictures to the US and had them published. And so they got nothing. And of course, they were furious and still are with Robert Ballard. I can show you that. I heard it because when I've been out on French expeditions, French ships, and I was told that you don't speak about Robert Ballard here. I was told by the crew members, we don't speak about him here. Final stop. So I said, okay, fine.
So do you remember where you were when you first saw those pictures?
Yeah, well, I don't remember exactly, but I remember I was here in Stockholm and saw the headlines. And first, there was this friend of mine, myself, and we were very uncertain to start with. But when we saw the moving images, I knew it was the Titanic. And then Ballard went back in 86, of course.
Did it surprise you that it was in two pieces?
I hadn't pondered so much about it. I thought she would be in one piece. This is how she was described. But if you put everything together, from the inquiries, for example, it was quite clear that something incredibly dramatic had happened. Now, this is going to be a bit strange now, but Lifeboat A was discovered by Oceanic on the 13th of May, 1912. They found 3 bodies and this ring that we have in the exhibition and other things. And they found these 3 bodies that later were buried in sea. Their mouths were filled with cork. And so they thought, first of all, there were rumors that they had starved to death trying to eat the cork belts. But the cork never came from them, because some people on the Carpathia said that, and also survivors said that the whole sea was just covered with something reddish. It's very interesting, because the cork actually came from the insulation in the cooling rooms behind the turbine.
Right.
And because of this info, if somebody had put this together with the fact that part of the whole aft staircase came floating, it would have been absolutely clear that she had definitely broken, because the staircase is where she broke.
But doesn't this come back to the earlier point about propaganda and national pride? They didn't want the official narrative to be that she broke because they wanted the ship, the British ship, to be strong enough to sustain it.
Yes, of course, the shipyard was very keen to say that she did sink like this, but it's called metal fatigue, I believe. So she was definitely not built for this.
No.
And I now been fighting with people against brittle steel, poor rivets, and you name it. And I just say the ship was driving with a speed of about 40 kilometers an hour. And she represented a living mass of 46,000 tons. And then she collided with the iceberg. Have you ever heard of Newton's third law?
Indeed.
You know it?
Yes.
You know it. And you know what it means.
Force equals
opposition. Correct.
Force, yeah.
Because I always bring up this in my lectures. Newton's third law is very important here. Because this is why Titanic sort of bumped against the iceberg. No merchant ship in the world could have withstood this. And the ships today are much weaker. Remember that? Much, much weaker. So it's nothing to do with how she was constructed, because the living force was far too great. And the same with the metal fatigue with when she was standing more or less upright. Lawrence Beasley, second class, says in his book, published a couple of months after Titanic, that it seemed as if the stern popped up and then went down again. And this is when the forward part had finally loosened itself from the second part. And then, as you might know, when the stern sank, I think that if you come down only 5 to 10 meters, the pressure is incredibly high. So, because there was this air pocket in the stern, the whole thing imploded. And that's why she looks as she does today.
And then accelerated.
Oy. Like a lump yard. There's a friend of mine on the expedition 94. He went down to see this, and he said afterwards, it's not recognizable. I have not been diving to the Titanic, by the way. No, I've not been. Everybody asked me. I said, sorry, no. But after the Titan disaster, I don't feel like diving.
No.
I think it's...
Fair enough.
No.
Really?
And my partner, when I told him that I'd pondered this, oh my God, he exploded. No, you can't go. You're not allowed to go. You may not go. Don't, he said. I said, I don't think so any longer. Because, I lost my friend PH, naturally.
Indeed. So,
what was your question, by the way?
Well, this is, we don't need questions. I think we can just go with it.
Yeah.
But we talked about your experience and your entry into the world of this. When did it turn into
research,
a career, if you will?
I had just been reading and collecting books, and I think it started. I had been into the archive in Stockholm, the public record office in Stockholm. But then there was a couple of guys who had a photographic gallery in Stockholm who talked me into making an exhibition, a small one, and I used my original photos. It's unbelievable today. And we made it, and then by then I had bought a collection from this friend of mine because he wanted to get rid of everything. So there were over 3,000 items in his collection. So it was quite a lot. And then when I realized that there was a lot to read in the archive, I got the idea that it's not only the embassy's archives that could be of interest, but the consulate archives, and that's something different. The consulates, they're closer to people. The embassy of Sweden was in Washington, but the consulate was in New York and in Montreal, for example. So I just ordered the files from the consulates, and they came with a trolley. It was like a truck. So I worked only half time later than in the school I was working, and dedicated my time to research. And so then I took the Maritime Museum into making an exhibition in 1987, which became such an enormous success that it was toured. So it went to Oslo. That was a second stop at the Maritime Museum. And then I had the opportunity to go into the archive in Oslo at the Foreign Ministry office. And I think there and then I realized there is something I can do here with writing and so on. But then nobody seemed to be interested. But thanks to a friend, he recommended me to a publisher on the west coast of Sweden. Did you know that then when they took the bodies to Halifax, the Captain Larnder, he had a press conference. He was very unwilling to sit there and talk in front of journalists. And then he said that when they picked up the bodies, he said like this: when we realized great wealth was involved, we decided to embalm. That's interesting. So that's why quite a few third-class crew, of course, were put back into the sea. And there was a Norwegian third-class passenger whose body was found, Sigurd Moen, and I've met actually his son, Johannes Moen, and he has given me, photos of what was found on his father's body. Among them a letter that he did not want me to publish then. But the embalmer wrote to Mrs. Moen that when I got him, he was absolutely blue, but I've done my best. And he's almost the only third-class passenger that was forwarded back, because they had to pay for it.
Sure.
Otherwise, Starline did not pay a cent. So I don't know how she could raise money to have the body sent back. I don't know. Because most of these relatives, they were destitute afterwards.
And that's one of a myriad of fascinating things. So the diversity of the people on board was incredible. And it was like a microcosm of society at the time. But someone who was in third or second class, they weren't, on a crossing or on a cruise. They were looking for a better life somewhere, right? Yeah. Whereas some of the first-class passengers were there because it was a place to be seen.
Yeah, but we should never call Titanic a cruise ship, because she was not.
No, exactly.
A cruise ship goes to harbors like the Titanic goes right over and then back. So she's a passenger liner. But I know they call her even a cruise ferry and things like that. It's appalling to listen to, but it is as it is. People with no knowledge call her a cruise ship. But she was definitely not a cruise ship. But in first, there were people traveling in third class who were quite well-to-do, but they still didn't want to waste too much money. So here is this Malcolm Jonsson, who was a successful businessman in St. Louis. He came home to buy the farmstead, his family's farmstead, but his father-in-law said no, he didn't want to sell. So in the evening before he was leaving, he sat in Värnamo in the south with his brother, Wilhelm Nilsson, and showed him where he kept his money, because he had so much cash with him. So he put them in the socks.
Right.
This is in Småland, landscape of Småland, where my father comes from, and he died in the sinking. But when they recorded him in the body list, he has no socks. Strange. So, because I asked my aunt once, coming from Småland, would you leave a cabin without your money? Absolutely not, she said. But Wilhelm Nilsson started a campaign to find out where are my brother's socks. So he contacted the consulate in New York, and they contacted White Starline. First, they didn't answer the letter from the consul, and Magnus Klarholm. And because he writes about this, I know that he walked up himself personally to White Star Line. He was very upset, he writes, and asked him, why don't you answer the letter? So the vice president of White Star Line had to start an investigation into the story of the socks of Malcolm Johnson. They never found the socks. But here was the seating card, his pocket watch, a few other things that was sold at Bukowski's years ago.
So how would he have felt if they brought him the socks but not the money?
Well, I don't know. It's such a strange story, really. We don't know.
No.
It's just an example of what happened. His body was in such a good condition that they brought him to Halifax and buried him there.
So if go back to the very beginning. So if we're in April of 1912.
Yeah, we were going to talk about life-saving equipment and security and safety, weren't we?
Yes. So hopefully we'll get to that.
I don't know.
But so at the beginning, how big of a deal is the Titanic? Because it's the second out of three sisters, and the Olympic was a really big deal. So the scenes, I mean, people will recognize the scenes in the beginning of the movie where there are thousands of people waving goodbye. That didn't happen with the Titanic, did it? Because it was a bit of an afterthought.
I've looked into Swedish newspapers, and in one paper in Gotlands-Posten, there was this small note saying Titania has left Southampton.
Right.
That's it.
That's it.
So she was not recognized as such. She was loaded to 1/6 of her capacity, and there were places for over 1,000 people still on the ship. So she was sort of half empty.
Yeah.
But today, Titanic has become something else.
Indeed, and I find that so fascinating. The fact that it's the tragedy that drives that. Because if she had arrived in New York and had a successful life, maybe even like the Britannic's been founded during the war, we wouldn't have remembered her.
No, but I compare her with people who die young. Evita Peron, Oscar Gardel, what's his name in Doors now? All these young people who then become legends because they died young, and Titanic died young, so to speak, her maiden voyage.
Yes.
And because of the name as well.
Yeah.
Just the name. So we have such a lot of coincidences that, for example, religious people want to do something about this. This was terrific for priests all over the world. Fantastic to talk about the hubris, the luxury, and so few lifeboats. But if we compare with Sweden or Norway or England, they had the same rules. There weren't lifeboats for everybody. Okay. There weren't.
But to address that specific point. So let's imagine that there were more lifeboats. Let's imagine that there were lifeboats
for everybody.
Did they have the time to save more people?
If there were more lifeboats, they would have had to have more able seamen. More able seamen cost more money. In the end, after the disaster, of course, there was no discussion. They had to add lifeboats. They had to add people who could handle them. But as was said in a lecture I went to, Titanic sank in a way that a boat shall sink.
Yeah, but it doesn't always happen that way, does it?
No, but if there had been more lifeboats, yes, definitely they would have saved much, much more. But it's not only that, because there were way over 400 seats unused. And this is because people didn't want to go up on deck. On the port side, they never allowed men into the boats. On the starboard side, Murdoch, he allowed anybody who wanted to go into a lifeboat. Anybody. But Lightoller on the port side stopped men from going. So in that case, many more would have been saved if they hadn't prevented men from going into the boats on the port side. This is so tragic. I've met the great-granddaughter of Charles Herbert Lightoller, and she looks upon her great-grandfather as something like a hero. But I told her there is a dark side here as well to this. because of the way he acted.
The idea of women and children first is often talked about in the context of the Titanic, but it's also talked about as something that had existed for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But there aren't that many other examples of it happening. This is
one of the great myths. Women and children. This is one of my books. So if we look here, because I had to have.
I think I'm going to mess this up, but there was a French ship called the Bourgogne.
There were several ships.
Only 2 decades before, where almost all women and children died, and only the crew survived. So it wasn't like a well-established maritime practice.
It goes back to Birkenhead tradition. Let's see where are we? Here. Here's the number of people survived. And I'm saying here that it's out of the survivors. There were 333 women and 323 men. So that's 10 people. Count the children, 56 if they are from 12 and younger. And then the difference is 353 men and 359 women. So 6 people. That is women and children first. That's why I call it Sagoskeppet. Do you understand the title? Saga is a fairy tale. It's because Beatrice Sandström, our last survivor, said to me once that it's like a fairy tale. Det är som en saga för mig.
This is where we leave the conversation for this first episode. In the next one, we continue to discuss more of the famous Titanic myths, and we're even going to talk about insurance. So we look forward to welcoming you back next time.